She doesn't look like she belongs here. That's what the flight supervisor said out loud in front of two pilots, a row of first-class passengers, and the woman he was talking about. No apology. No correction. Just a smug glance at her boarding pass. Then a cold gesture toward the economy gate. She was black, dressed in clean, understated clothes, holding a diplomacy class ticket and a quiet kind of dignity that made people uncomfortable. And in that moment, none of it mattered. Not the credentials, not the clearance, just her presence in a space they thought wasn't meant for people who looked like her. But here's what they didn't know. The woman they humiliated in front of a crowd wasn't just another passenger. She was the lead auditor from a global compliance authority. The one person who had the legal and financial authority to suspend a $12.4 billion loan without permission from anyone else. And she had come here not just to observe, but to test. Quietly, systematically, fatally, they failed. Not because they made a mistake, but because they revealed who they truly were when no one they respected was watching. This story doesn't start with a warm welcome or a ticking clock. It starts with a slap of prejudice dressed up in protocol, and it ends with a reckoning. You think you know how this plays out? Watch closely. Where are you watching from? What would you have done if that was you in her place? Let us know in the comments. And if stories like this matter, stories where injustice doesn't win, subscribe. Because what happens next will change everything. The glass doors at Terminal D1 of Atlanta International Airport slid open with a muted whisper, revealing the soft beige interiors of the Diplomatic Priority Lounge, a space reserved for those whose names appeared in press releases and billion-dollar deal memos. Camilla Frost, 34, stepped through the threshold without hesitation. Her pace was even, not rushed. Her black leather carry-on rolled beside her with silent wheels, and her eyes, steel gray behind thin-framed glasses, swept across the space with quiet awareness. She wore a slate gray blazer, no brand logos, a clean white blouse, black trousers, and polished flats. Practical, unassuming, purposeful. Her boarding pass glowed faintly on her phone screen, marked with a digital seal. Diplomacy Pass Clearance Level 4. She approached the security checkpoint manned by two uniformed guards, both middle-aged. Their expressions a practiced mix of sternness and politeness. The taller one, badge reading E. Dawes, raised a hand to stop her as she held out her phone. "Ma'am," he said, tone-clipped but not overtly rude. "This gate is reserved for Level 4 diplomatic boarding and executive transfer protocols. I believe you may be at the wrong section." Camilla didn't flinch. "That's precisely what my clearance states." She tilted her phone slightly, allowing him to scan the QR code. Dawes glanced at the screen, then back at her, then back at the screen. He didn't scan it. He just looked and hesitated. "Is this your boarding pass?" he asked, his brow furrowing. "Yes," she replied calmly. Camilla Frost. Booked directly through Global Transfer Authority. Under code F14, audit. Confirmation ref DPLK 03928. Dawes blinked at the technical terminology. Then came the quick glance, top to bottom. The blazer. No diamond watch. No designer bag. No corporate entourage. Just one woman with a quiet presence and the wrong look for power. Behind her, the automatic doors hissed open again. For men entered, speaking Arabic in hushed tones. They wore tailored suits in cream and navy, pocket square sharp, one holding a leather briefcase with an embossed crest. Without a word exchanged, Dawes turned toward them and gestured forward. "Welcome, sirs. Right this way," he said, his demeanor instantly lighter. Camilla stepped aside to let them pass. She caught a glimpse of one man's boarding documents. His identification tag wasn't even visible on the screen, just an empty placeholder. Yet the guard said nothing. No extra questions. No doubt. Familiarity made the rules elastic. Camilla, on the other hand, had everything required, but no face they recognized. That made her an anomaly, a potential threat to the status quo. Dawes turned back to her. "I'm going to have to ask you to wait over there while we verify your credentials further. This shouldn't take long." Camilla didn't argue. She simply nodded, moved to the side, and stood silently near a polished steel column. From there, she had a full view of the diplomatic corridor beyond the checkpoint, a glass hallway leading directly to the priority jet bridge. There, power passed without friction. Everything about it was engineered for efficiency and prestige. But not for people like her. She tapped on her phone, opened a secure file, checked a timestamp. Her appointment with Richard Ellman, CEO of Atlantic Eagle Airlines, was marked for 11:45 a.m., a formality following a 6-week silent audit across the airline's 17 international hubs. Camila had flown 22 times in the last 47 days, blending in, noting everything: service inconsistencies, staff behavior, route performance, cost efficiency, ethical compliance. This final leg wasn't just a flight, it was the fulcrum, the final observation before the verdict. But they didn't know that. To Dawes, she was just another woman out of place. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The guard spoke in low tones with a supervisor who arrived mid-shift. He squinted at her file, shook his head, and said something she couldn't hear. One of them laughed, not cruelly, just casually dismissive, as if she were an intern who had wandered into the wrong department. Camila folded her arms. Not in defiance, just a subtle self-embrace. She'd seen this before, at airports, in boardrooms, in grant committee receptions and financial consortiums. People who couldn't process the idea that someone like her held the kind of authority that didn't need to wear diamonds to be real. Another group approached the checkpoint, this time 2 women in power suits, chatting loudly about an acquisition deal. One flashed a black Centurion card with a grin. Dawes didn't check anything. They were waved through. Camila exhaled softly. She remembered something her mentor had once told her: the higher you climb, the more invisible you become, until they realize you're standing over them. Her phone buzzed. A message from internal oversight flashed. Are you on board yet? Ellman will be briefed after landing. No media involved. She typed back, slight delay. Gata integrity kommer most. Observing further. One of the guards approached her again. Not Dawes, the younger one. Nervous, eyes darting. Sorry again, MS. Frost. Just protocol. You understand, right? We just don't get many independent agents coming through this gate. Camila's lips curved slightly. Not a smile. Just acknowledgement. I understand perfectly, she said, cool and steady. I specialize in recognizing patterns of access denial. It's what I do. The young man blinked, confused. She didn't elaborate. Let the mystery settle. The truth was, she could have called Ellman right now. Could have cleared the path with a single secure message. But no. This gate, this interaction, this was the audit. The quiet test they didn't know they were taking. And so far they were failing. Badly. The lounge smelled faintly of citrus and money, both engineered. Camila sat on a single leather armchair near the floor-to-ceiling windows, her legs crossed neatly, her phone resting on her thigh, the boarding pass still open on screen, its digital seal now blinking amber, as if mocking her still-waiting status. She'd been allowed through, not because her credentials were accepted, but because the lounge supervisor, alerted by the mounting confusion at the gate, had decided to temporarily accommodate the guest while we verify things further. The language was thinly veiled. You don't belong, but we'll avoid a scene. Camila had simply nodded and walked in, past stairs that trailed like smoke. The lounge was softly lit, with gold accents and muted jazz floating overhead. Suits rustled gently as clients scrolled on tablets or spoke into invisible mics about numbers and markets. It looked peaceful. It felt poisoned. A server in a perfectly pressed vest moved through the room, holding a silver tray with chilled bottles of water and fluted glasses. Camila watched as the server bypassed her twice, once to serve the woman 2 chairs to her left, then again to refill the glass of a man across from her who hadn't even looked up. Camila raised a single finger politely, not waving, just signaling readiness. The server's eyes met hers, hesitated, then veered off course toward another group by the bar. She waited, counted 3 full rotations. By the 4th, she stood. "Excuse me," she said, her voice low and steady as she approached the serving station. "May I please have a glass of water?" The server didn't look up right away. When he did, his expression held the tight politeness of someone trying to remain composed while suppressing a pre-programmed suspicion. Apologies, ma'am, he said. We're prioritizing beverage service for platinum tier guests while the main service resets. Could I ask for your membership number? Camila blinked once. No, but you may note that I hold diplomatic clearance and a confirmed boarding pass through Atlantic Eagle's global diplomatic tier. I'm not here on a points card. The server's eyebrows twitched. He gave a shallow nod and poured the water anyway, but the hesitation had already spoken louder than any policy. As she returned to her seat, a woman across the lounge, a tall, sharp-featured blonde in a pastel pantsuit, leaned toward her friend and said, not quite whispering, "Looks like the cleaning staff gets to relax before shift change now." Her friend chuckled into her espresso, not bothering to hide it. Camila paused mid-sip, lowered her glass slowly, and glanced at the two. The blonde met her gaze directly, then turned away with a smirk as if daring her to escalate. Camila said nothing. The burn wasn't in the insult, it was in how routine it all felt. She'd lived in financial cities around the globe, and in every terminal, every lobby, there was always someone like this woman, fluent in the currency of superiority, spending microaggressions like loose change. A man seated nearby, mid-40s, South Asian, well-dressed, offered a small, sympathetic shrug, then returned to his newspaper. It was always like this. People noticed, but never enough to disrupt comfort. Camila reached into her bag and retrieved a thin tablet. She opened an encrypted document titled YEXI Internal Risk Flag Log ATL D1 Lounge. Her fingers moved quickly, noting water service withheld. Delay due to tier bias. Staff prioritized visible wealth indicators. Female guest at seat L14. Verbal mockery. Indicative of systemic tolerance. She added timestamps, exact phrases, nonverbal reactions. Everything documented. Everything recorded, not for social media, not for revenge, but for governance. She didn't need outrage. She needed patterns. She looked up again, this time at the large display near the center of the lounge, showing global flight paths and investment dashboards. A scrolling banner read, Atlantic Eagle Airlines named top ethical transporter in North America 2025. Camila felt a flicker of dark amusement at the irony. These spaces were designed to project prestige, but under the gloss, they often failed the simplest of tests, humanity. A staff member approached, a younger man, clean-shaven, clearly uncomfortable. "MS. Frost?" he asked hesitantly. "My name is Darren. I'm the guest liaison manager. We're still verifying your transit clearance. I appreciate your patience." Camila studied him for a beat. "And your findings so far?" He hesitated. "Our system doesn't seem to recognize your confirmation code, but I've escalated it to our internal operations desk. I'm sure it's just a processing issue." Camila nodded. "Good. Because if your system can't verify my clearance, then either your system is broken or someone has removed it intentionally. Either scenario is interesting." Darren swallowed and offered a tight smile. "Understood. We'll prioritize it." "Please do," Camila replied, then returned her gaze to her tablet. She tapped another line into her file. System flagging used as passive barrier. Escalation met with vague assurance. No action of substance taken yet. Across the room, the blonde woman shifted, clearly aware that her words had not gone unnoticed. But she didn't apologize. She didn't need to, because no one expected her to. That was part of the rot. Camila looked at the time. 10:36 a.m. Still over an hour until her flight, and already 4 discrete failures in conduct, ethics, and operational integrity. She had more than enough to raise a level 2 alert. But she wasn't done collecting. The real test hadn't started yet. A bell chimed as new guests entered. The server, now suddenly all smiles, rushed to greet them. 2 men in sleek suits, laughing about something in Italian. The contrast was too precise to be coincidental. Camila watched, waited, noted again. The woman across the room, L14, was now glancing over nervously. Perhaps it dawned on her that Camila wasn't who she thought. Perhaps it didn't. Either way, the seed was planted. Camila tapped one final note before setting the tablet down. Hostility does not always wear boots. Sometimes it wears silk and laughs over brunch. Then she closed the file, leaned back, and drank her water. Slowly, calmly, like someone who knew she would own the room, just not yet. Camila stood up from her lounge seat precisely at 10:47 a.m., her posture composed, her expression unreadable as she tucked the tablet back into her carry-on and headed toward the private breakfast enclave at the far end of the lounge. The area, roped off by a velvet partition and marked by subtle gold signage, was designed for the highest-tier guests, those who negotiated mergers before sunrise and signed contracts that altered stock prices by lunch. A faint scent of freshly baked croissants and French-pressed coffee lingered in the air as Camila approached the welcome desk. Behind it stood a young woman in a navy blue suit, her name tag reading Jessica, her hair in a tight bun, her demeanor polished to the point of perfection. Camila stopped politely, offered a slight nod, and presented her boarding pass. Frost. Camila. Diplomacy clearance. She spoke as she had done dozens of times before, clearly, calmly, directly. Jessica smiled, glanced at the screen on her terminal, then frowned faintly. Her eyes flicked up toward Camila, then down again. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said after a beat, her tone measured. "It looks like your name isn't showing up on our breakfast registry." Camila raised a brow. "I wasn't aware separate registries existed for amenities included in diplomatic tier access." Jessica's fingers hovered above the keyboard, unsure. "It's standard practice. Our system updates every hour, and it may have missed your record. Sometimes codes like yours, especially the audit ones, get caught in the filter. But you're welcome to enjoy the main dining area just behind the library lounge. It's more relaxed there." The words were spoken smoothly, with a practiced smile, but underneath was a very clear message. This space is not for you. Camila held the younger woman's gaze for a moment, letting the silence settle. "So to clarify," she said evenly, "the system that verified my clearance to board a restricted diplomatic gate and logged me into the international audit database linked with your central finance office is unable to confirm whether I'm entitled to access a plate of eggs and toast." Jessica looked flustered now, her rehearsed composure beginning to falter. "I just follow protocol, ma'am. If you'd like me to escalate it—" "No," Camila cut in, her voice still calm. "Please don't interrupt the chain of failure. It's useful to observe where it leads." Before Jessica could formulate a response, Camila turned her gaze toward the small clipboard sitting on the counter beside the check-in screen. It was the printed registry, a backup guest list used when digital errors occurred. Her eyes scanned it quickly, row after row of names, room numbers, and seat assignments. At the bottom of page 2, she spotted it, Frost, C. Seat 1D, audit class flagged for review. Someone had taken a red pen and scratched a rough diagonal line through her name. In the notes section beside it, written in looping cursive, was "Verify if real. Doesn't match usual profile." Camila said nothing. She didn't need to. The proof was right there, blatant and bureaucratic, yet deeply personal in its implications. The ink was fresh, the assumption even fresher. She turned and walked back toward the center of the lounge, leaving Jessica at the desk, blinking rapidly and biting her lip. Halfway back to her seat, she passed a group of 3 men seated near the hallway entrance. One of them leaned in slightly as she walked by and muttered, not softly enough, "Some of these diplomatic invites are getting a bit inclusivity." The others laughed. A low ripple of amusement passed between them. Camila paused, just slightly, as if considering whether to turn and address them. But she didn't. Not yet. Her eyes, instead, flicked to the overhead monitor, now displaying weather patterns over Zurich, her final destination. Still on schedule. She sat again and opened her file for the 3rd time, updating the log with surgical precision. Name redacted manually. Flagged based on appearance. Staff redirected guest without due cause. Implicit bias noted. Nonverbal hostility escalating. Recommendation: elevate risk review to level B pending further observation. She tapped send. The message encrypted and transferred to a secured audit channel routed through Geneva. Not for retaliation, For record, this wasn't personal, not yet. It was structural, and Camila dealt in structures. 10 minutes later, a staff member brought over a plate of fruit and a hot coffee. No explanation, no apology. Just a silent offering of what should have been automatic. Camila accepted it without comment, nodding once in thanks. She didn't drink it. She didn't touch the plate. She simply let it sit there, untouched, a symbol more than sustenance. From across the lounge, Jessica looked over. Their eyes met again briefly. There was a shift in her face, uncertainty now, perhaps even guilt. But Camila didn't hold the stare. She didn't need to. The point had been made, and it would be made again. Because this wasn't just about a breakfast list. It was about how quickly access disappeared the moment someone didn't fit the architecture of wealth, of expectation. You could have every credential in the world, but if your skin wasn't familiar, your posture not loud enough, your jewelry not gleaming, there was always someone ready to ask, "Are you sure this is your seat?" Camila closed the file and checked the time. 11:05 a.m., 40 minutes until boarding. Her internal report was growing more complex, more damning. Every interaction, a new thread. Every subtle humiliation, a data point. What they didn't realize was that every failure to see her wasn't just an offense. It was an audit in motion. And when she finally revealed what she had been collecting, when the patterns were compiled, categorized, and cross-referenced, there wouldn't be a debate. There would be consequences. The moment came quietly, as it often did. No alarm, no announcement, just the subtle escalation of exclusion, shifting from whispered assumptions to institutional action. At 11:13 a.m., Camila received a discreet tap on her shoulder. She turned calmly to find one of the security officers from earlier, Dawes, again, now joined by a woman in a black blazer with an airport operations badge clipped to her lapel. Her expression was neutral, but not warm. "MS. Frost," she began, her tone overly careful. "I'm going to have to ask you to accompany us to the general waiting area. There's been a complication regarding your clearance, and we'd like to resolve it away from this section." Camila blinked once, slowly, not in surprise, but in silent acknowledgement that the theater of de-escalation had now reached its next act. "What exactly is the nature of the complication?" she asked evenly, her voice controlled. The woman hesitated for half a beat, then answered, "It appears there's been a mismatch between your booking code and our internal registry. Until it's resolved, we've been advised to relocate you to minimize guest disruption." Camila arched an eyebrow. "Disruption," she repeated, tasting the word. "You mean confusion? Or is it discomfort?" Dawes shifted awkwardly beside his colleague, avoiding eye contact. Camila stood slowly, smoothing the hem of her blazer. "Of course. Lead the way." As they walked through the lounge and out into the broader terminal, the eyes followed her again, curious, detached, but always assessing. To them, she might have looked like someone who had tried to sneak past the velvet rope and was now being escorted back to her rightful station. No one asked why. No one intervened. They never did. The general waiting area was crowded, noisy, buzzing with travel stress and the scent of industrial-grade coffee. Camila was led to a low-slung seat near a charging station that buzzed faintly. The officer gestured for her to wait. She complied without a word. After they left, she opened her phone and pulled up the internal contact list coded into her audit clearance folder. She selected a line labeled Finance Liaison E Holdings Direct and tap call. 3 rings. Then a voice, crisp, young male answered. "Atlantic Eagle Finance Division, Internal Channel 7. Camila identified herself by audit code only. Frost C. Global Audit Node F14, Class 5 Clearance, Embedded Review ATL D1. I need verification on routing integrity and booking suppression protocol. Immediate." The man hesitated only a second. "Understood. Verification in progress. Please hold." But the hold never came. A deeper voice replaced his. "This is Deputy Director Shaw, MS. Frost, do you suspect manipulation of clearance status?" Camila didn't blink. "I have cause to believe my diplomatic booking code has been manually downgraded within the ATL terminal registry." No system failure. Intentional override. Frontline personnel not flagged for audit presence. 2 redirection attempts logged. Direct access blocked to lounge tier services, followed by forced removal. Shaw exhaled audibly. We'll pull the access logs immediately. Sit tight. Do not engage further with local management. Central will handle this. Camila ended the call and set the phone aside, her demeanor calm. Then came the voice, sarcastic, condescending, from behind her. Making calls already? That fast? She turned slightly to see a man standing near the cafe counter, holding a coffee and looking at her with an amused expression. His badge identified him as a senior ground coordinator. Ms. Frost, right? Listen, I don't know who you're calling, but finance teams don't take walk-ins seriously. You really think you have their number? His chuckle was low, dismissive. Lady, those people operate in a different orbit. I'd know. I used to run transfers for the Zurich hub. Camila looked at him a moment longer, then replied simply, Yes, I'm sure you did. The man's smirk widened, mistaking her restraint for uncertainty. Anyway, someone's on their way to figure out where you actually belong. Best not to complicate things. She said nothing, just pulled out her tablet and made a new log entry. Ground Coordinator ATL. GC 7 verbal undermining of authority. Presumes audit subject lacks access or legitimacy. Confirmed Tier 3 personnel with no current audit clearance. Observation. Systemic belief that audit agents do not appear like me. 15 minutes passed. Then 30. Around her, boarding announcements echoed. Children cried. Luggage rolled. Her presence faded into the crowd, exactly as intended by those who'd moved her here. Camila, however, was not concerned with visibility. She was concerned with leverage. And this manufactured displacement had just given her everything she needed to elevate the audit. Because what they had failed to realize was that in moving her out of sight, they had also removed the illusion of ignorance. Now every action taken from this point forward was informed, which meant every mistake was deliberate. At 11:48 a.m., a senior uniformed agent approached, breathless. MS. Frost, my apologies. We've just been notified. There's been a serious oversight. Your access has been fully reinstated. We'll escort you back immediately. Camila stood, nodded once, and followed. Not because she needed reinstatement, but because she needed them to finish the performance. They were writing their own indictment, and she intended to let them fill every page. Camila followed the uniformed agent back through the terminal's echoing walkways, her shoes clicking softly on polished tile, the sterile scent of disinfectant layered with a subtle musk of thousands of passing lives. Her face was impassive, but her mind calculated with every step. Her access had been fully reinstated, they said, but only after a 35-minute delay, only after being physically displaced, and only after a senior-level intervention from financial headquarters. That sequence alone was enough for a full audit escalation, but the morning wasn't finished teaching its lessons in humiliation. As they passed through a restricted door into the premium boarding corridor, she was met by a lounge concierge, this time a woman, blonde, tall, and brisk in movement. The woman held a clipboard, but offered no introduction. She simply said, "Right this way," as if Camila had been late for a meeting she hadn't requested. Camila said nothing. She was past the point of performance. They re-entered the main lounge through a side corridor leading directly into the high-tier boarding section. Only a few guests remained, those with the highest clearances and the most direct access to the aircraft. Near the refreshment counter, a staff member was preparing drinks, a small machine humming softly, steam hissing. Camila moved toward a standing counter near the wall and pulled out her tablet to review a new transmission from Geneva. The reply to her latest entry had come in. Clearance audit elevated to Phase 2. Proceed with direct pattern capture. Final stage initiated. She was mid-scan when a voice rang out behind her, light, feminine, and slightly too cheerful. "Oh, so sorry." Camila turned in time to see a young flight attendant lurching forward, a full cup of hot coffee sloshing from the edge of her silver tray. The dark liquid hit her blazer square across the right shoulder and sleeve, soaking through the fabric with shocking speed. A few splashes hit her hand and tablet, though she quickly angled the device away. The attendant gasped, eyes wide, hands fluttering uselessly. "Oh my gosh, I didn't see you there. These trays, they're impossible in tight corners." She fumbled for napkins, blotting ineffectually at the already ruined blazer. Camila held still, silent, not reacting, her lips a thin line as her hand curled tightly around the edge of the tablet. The attendant glanced down at the spreading stain, then forced a smile. "At least it's not a Chanel. I mean, it's not, right?" She laughed lightly, like it was a harmless joke. Camila looked at her, really looked at her. The woman's posture betrayed nothing overtly malicious. No obvious smirk. But the comment, the phrasing, the laughter, all carefully framed within the plausible deniability of accident. The mark wasn't just on her blazer. It was on her position, her presence, her legitimacy. Camila reached into her pocket, pulled out a slim black card, and handed it to the woman. "Operations Instant File," she said. "Please submit a full report to the code listed." Now, the attendant blinked, glanced at the card, and paled slightly. I didn't mean anything by it," she stammered. "It was just coffee." Camila's voice remained steady. "Yes, that's exactly what I'm documenting." She turned away and moved toward the nearest restroom. In the mirror, the damage was clear. Her shoulder was stained deep brown, the linen blouse underneath also ruined. She removed the blazer carefully, folded it once, and placed it in a paper bag handed to her by a staff member who had followed her in with a nervous expression. No apology, just logistical aid. When she returned to the terminal, she was met by 2 security officers standing near a side door. One held a small tablet. "Ms. Frost," he said. "Would you come with us for a moment? Just a quick check. Routine." Camila narrowed her gaze. "Check of what nature?" The man's eyes darted toward the device in his hand. A report was submitted by a passenger, suggesting there may have been suspicious behavior related to baggage handling. "We're obligated to follow up, especially for high-tier passengers." Camila didn't move. "Suspicious behavior, according to whom?" "We can't disclose that information, ma'am. It's just a quick bag scan and formality." Formality. That word again. The polite wrapper for indignity. She looked down at her carry-on. Same case, same locks, same contents she had carried through dozens of terminals across 3 continents in the past 6 weeks. No one had ever questioned it. No one had ever asked. Until now. "Of course," she said finally, her voice almost bored. "Lead the way." They took her into a small glass-walled room adjacent to the terminal. Inside, a metal table, 2 chairs, and a scanning unit. One of the officers opened her bag with her consent, laid out the contents, and scanned everything meticulously. Tablet, files, charger, pen set, even the backup blazer she kept vacuum sealed in a side pouch. Nothing out of place. No issue raised. The search was performed by the book. And yet Camila watched them closely, not for what they found, but for what they assumed. When they finished, one officer offered a tight smile. "Thanks for your cooperation. You're clear." "Of course I am," Camila replied, repacking her bag with clinical efficiency. "But now you're not." The officer tilted his head, confused. Camila tapped her watch and muttered, "Log entry uploaded. Security bias event tagged ATL T5R." He blinked. Sorry, what does that mean?" She turned toward the door, replying without looking back. "It means the audit just crossed the threshold into recommendation territory." She stepped back into the terminal, shoulders squared, expression reset. The stain still showed on her white blouse, but she didn't cover it. She wore it like a seal, a visible record of what had just occurred. And everyone who saw it, everyone who dared to glance and wonder, became part of the case. Camila returned to the boarding corridor with a stain on her blouse clearly visible, her steps deliberate and unhurried, her breath steady. There was no longer a need to blend in. The time for subtlety had passed the moment the coffee touched her shoulder and the security escort took her aside like an outlier to be neutralized. Now, she moved not as a mystery to be judged, but as a force to be documented by everyone watching. The lounge was shifting into its pre-boarding rhythm, passengers collecting their things, staff straightening ties and calling out seat numbers with affected enthusiasm. Camila took a seat near the exclusive diplomatic lane, adjusting her sleeves slightly so the brown coffee stain sat squarely over her heart, visible to every staff member who passed. Some stared and looked away. Others pretended not to notice at all. She opened her tablet again, keyed in a series of commands, and watched as her audit log synced directly with the global oversight database. The light on the corner of the device blinked green. A new alert popped up in the top right. Name not found in boarding registry. ATL terminal system error. Code 21/status. Unverified. Camila narrowed her eyes. She refreshed. The message persisted. She ran a clearance override. Access denied. She checked the system time log. 7 minutes ago, her boarding pass had been manually disabled by someone flagged only as internal ops. ATL HQ override. Her clearance file still read as valid. Her security scan had already passed. There was no rational justification, which meant it wasn't rational. It was targeted. Camila closed the tablet slowly and stood up. She walked to the check-in desk, where a senior flight officer, tall, broad-shouldered, late 50s, was reviewing a clipboard. His uniform was crisp, but his attention was casual. He looked up when she approached, offering a quick, professional nod. "Ma'am, boarding will begin shortly. Can I assist you?" "You can," she said. Camila Frost. Diplomacy clearance. "My boarding pass was deactivated within the last 10 minutes. I'd like to know under what directive." The man's brows lifted slightly. He tapped the screen in front of him, then frowned. Your name isn't showing up in our system." He turned toward a younger associate. "Run a manual check on seat 1D, would you?" The woman nodded, typing quickly. "Nothing's populating, sir," she said after a moment. "Looks like the record was purged." Camila folded her arms. "Purged." The officer cleared his throat. It could be a system maintenance error. Happens sometimes before long-haul diplomatic flights. Usually someone's reservation gets flagged by the server cache. "I can get operations to reissue your pass manually." Before she could reply, another voice cut through the space, clear, confident, dismissive. "Honestly, I don't know why we're still wasting time on this." Camila turned to find a man approaching from the far hallway, ID badge swinging from his neck. He was in his early 40s, hair gel tight, jaw square, blazer too expensive for a ground roll. His voice was loud enough to be heard by 3 passengers nearby. "I just spoke to Anderson in routing," he continued, directing the words at the senior officer but throwing occasional glances at Camila. "There's no record of her. Not in the secure diplomatic manifest, not in the crew clearance, nothing. So unless this is some kind of mistake from Geneva, I'd say she's trying to bluff her way through the tier system." Camila didn't speak. Not yet. She just tilted her head slightly, watching the man as he continued his performance, convinced that dominance was earned by projection. "We've got state officials boarding in the next 30 minutes, he went on, voice rising. "We don't need confusion. I don't know who signed off on this woman's clearance." He even used air quotes, "but I've been here long enough to know who belongs and who doesn't. This doesn't." The room went still. The air changed. The people closest to the desk suddenly found other things to look at. The junior associate typed nervously. Even the senior officer shifted uncomfortably, clearly unsure how to respond. Camila let the silence stretch a second longer, then spoke. "And your name is?" The man hesitated, then replied. "Mason Colburn, Director of Terminal Operations." "You." Camila smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She reached into her bag, pulled out a matte black card case, and slid a single embossed card across the counter toward the officer. The officer picked it up, scanned it quickly, and paled. The badge read, "International Compliance Authority Audit Agent, Class 5, F14 Oversight Node, active." It carried a live chip certification that shimmered as it moved. Mason Colburn leaned in to glance, then froze. Camilla stepped forward, voice quiet but heavy. Mr. Colburn, you've just knowingly misrepresented a security override to block a level 5 audit agent from boarding an assigned diplomatic flight. You've disclosed false information publicly, misused system authority, and breached the chain of operational neutrality during a compliance evaluation. That's 3 major violations, one of which constitutes grounds for suspension under international aviation ethics protocols. Colburn's jaw clenched. Look, I didn't know. You didn't ask. Camilla cut in. You assumed. And now we'll proceed accordingly. The officer at the desk quickly tapped a secure channel. Get Geneva on the line. Now. Camilla turned back to her tablet and opened a new entry. Boarding access manually revoked by non-authorized terminal official. System log manipulation confirmed. Security breach probable. Recommended action. Freeze ATL Tier 1 funding channel pending full investigation. She tapped send. This wasn't a threat. It was a report. Camilla stood at the terminal operations desk, her presence now undeniable, the silence around her almost ceremonial. The weight of her badge, once dismissed as a curiosity or bluff, now sat like a stone in the minds of those who had questioned her. The junior associates stopped fidgeting. The senior officer stopped offering hollow explanations. And Mason Colburn, the man who had moments ago paraded his authority, stood frozen, the color draining from his face, as he realized just how far beyond his clearance level Camilla operated. Still, she didn't speak further. She had already said enough. The evidence was logged, the violations recorded, and the report had been transmitted. What came next did not need her voice. It needed only her presence. At 11:58 a.m., Camilla walked away from the operations desk and seated herself again in the lounge's far corner, just within view of the gate corridor. She opened her laptop, thinner than her tablet, with a matte black casing and no visible logo. She input a 4-level authentication key, then pulled up a single secure window linked to the Geneva Central Oversight Terminal. Her fingers moved fast, precise, professional. One line, no preamble, no explanation. F-14 inspection code, red trigger ethics breach level 3. Response directive 91 alpha. Then she pressed enter. The message vanished, encrypted and logged into the secure node of the International Compliance Authority's internal server, then rerouted through Zurich, Brussels, and Ottawa. Within 60 seconds, 5 satellite offices had received the signal. Within 90, the message reached the Global Funding Council monitoring Atlantic Eagle's eligibility for its pending $12.4 billion sustainability credit line, a loan that had taken the company 3 years of lobbying to secure. Exactly 4 minutes and 20 seconds later, the glass doors at the private access corridor opened with a hiss, and a man in a steel gray suit strode in, his pace too quick for comfort, his face set in a tight, pale grimace. It was Richard Ellman, Chief Executive Officer of Atlantic Eagle Holdings, one of the most powerful aviation conglomerates in the Western Hemisphere. He didn't speak to anyone. He walked straight through the stunned lounge, brushing past Mason Colburn without so much as a glance. His eyes scanned the room until they locked onto Camilla, sitting alone, laptop open, her hands clasped neatly in front of her like a professor waiting for the student who plagiarized the final exam to confess. MS. Frost, he said, stopping precisely 3 feet in front of her, voice low and urgent. We weren't informed of your arrival. Camilla tilted her head slightly, measured him. That was the point. Ellman exhaled slowly, clearly doing mental math, calculating not how to fix this, but how bad it already was. I've been briefed, he continued. The override on your boarding pass was unauthorized, as was the audit suppression attempt. Camilla said nothing. She wanted him to keep speaking, to keep unraveling his company's own defense. He gestured to a small conference room off to the side, the kind used for final business class negotiations. Can we speak privately? He asked. No, Camilla replied. Transparency begins in the open. Ellman looked around. Half the staff pretended not to watch. The other half didn't bother hiding it. Camilla leaned forward slightly. My presence here is not just as an auditor. I'm acting as final signatory authority for the F-14 Sustainability Fund, which your board has requested as leverage against existing debt obligations. You knew that. Elman nodded, his jaw tight. Yes. Then you also know that the funding hinges on ethics compliance across all tiers, including terminal conduct, staff neutrality, and passenger discrimination thresholds. Yes. And you now understand that your staff, from security to operations, has violated those thresholds multiple times in under 2 hours. Elman didn't answer. He didn't need to. Camilla continued, her voice steady, clear. You see, Mr. Elman, I was not here to be treated with respect because I'm an agent. I was here to see how your system behaves when it doesn't recognize a name, when the uniform doesn't match the expectation. I came as a mirror. Your people responded with assumptions. And now, those assumptions will cost you. Elman cleared his throat, his voice almost a whisper now. How much damage? Camilla tapped her laptop and pulled up a projection model. Preliminary estimates placed reputational downgrades at 14% over 2 fiscal quarters. Financial risk triggers at red flag tier 1. Immediate suspension of the $12.4 billion credit line pending full investigation. Elman didn't respond. His silence said everything. But Camilla wasn't done. Furthermore, she added, as of this morning, your company has entered ethics observation status under Clause 8A. That means all secondary projects tied to that loan are now frozen. Elman took a half step back, as if bracing from a blow. We're preparing for a major transatlantic expansion. We have contracts pending with national airports. This puts all of it in jeopardy. Camilla's expression didn't change. It's not the expansion that's in jeopardy, Mr. Elman. It's the foundation, the people your system chooses to see, and those it chooses not to. With that, she stood. My report will be delivered in full within 72 hours. In the meantime, I suggest you speak with your human capital director. You'll need a new one. And then she walked away, not because she was finished, but because she had finally begun. Camilla moved swiftly through the internal corridor, flanked now by 2 silent executive escorts, both summoned by Richard Elman the moment she had closed her laptop. No one spoke as they passed frosted glass partitions and discreet security doors, entering the innermost suite of the terminal, the transit command hub, a space few passengers ever glimpsed. It wasn't just a meeting room, it was a bunker for power. The room was stark, polished, and cold, with recessed lighting casting long shadows across a steel conference table. At one end, a curved wall screen displayed real-time air traffic, financial index fluctuations, and internal comms dashboards. At the other, a holographic projector hummed quietly. Camilla placed her laptop at the head of the table. She didn't sit. She stood with her hands resting lightly on the brushed aluminum surface, her poise unshaken, as 8 senior executives filed into the room. Legal, operations, security, public affairs, and of course, human resources. All eyes were wary, some defensive. None were confident. Elman stood near the door, arms folded, eyes down. He had briefed them quickly before she arrived. But even now, they weren't sure how much damage had already been done. Let's begin, Camilla said, her voice clear, not raised. The screen behind her flickered, and her audit dashboard appeared, redacted only at the edges. Every timestamp, every policy breach, every quote had been logged, categorized, and correlated. She gestured to the data streams cascading down the display. This is a summary of observed violations over a 4-hour audit window conducted under diplomatic access. The focus was not on technical compliance. That phase is complete. This phase was behavioral. She tapped a key, and a list expanded, name after name, color-coded by infraction severity. 15 staff members, including 4 supervisors, 2 department heads, and 1 director, demonstrated behavior that directly contradicts international ethics compliance standards. Bias, procedural manipulation, verbal misconduct, suppression of passenger rights, unlawful override of access clearance, falsification of security threat reports. She paused to let the weight of the words settle. No cameras were necessary. No recordings. This data was collected through direct engagement, live monitoring, and observational auditing under Protocol F14, approved by the Council for Corporate Ethics and Accountability. The legal advisor cleared his throat, but said nothing. The HR director, a pale, sharp-suited man named Hale, leaned forward. With all due respect, Ms. Frost, some of these incidents may be isolated lapses in judgment, perhaps not systemic. Camila looked at him, not with anger, but with piercing detachment. Mr. Hale, when 15 employees in 4 departments default to the same behavior pattern toward the same demographic profile, that's not a lapse. That's training, or worse, tolerance. Hale swallowed hard and sat back. She advanced the slide again. Per Article 12C of your conditional loan agreement, the pending sustainability fund of $12.4 billion is subject to a behavior-based audit. That clause was not for show. It was inserted after 3 partner airlines failed to address internal discrimination complaints and were subsequently stripped of their funding. You signed it. So did your board. She turned to Elman, who nodded slightly, eyes closed for a beat. Therefore, Camila continued, this audit's outcome carries immediate implications. I am submitting a preliminary enforcement directive to the Financial Oversight Council recommending the suspension of the following: the Zurich Expansion Initiative, the Lisbon Cargo Corridor Project, and the Frankfurt Executive Terminal, all 3 scheduled to break ground Q3 this year. A murmur swept the room. Legal whispered to PR. Operations checked his tablet. Hale went pale. Camila didn't flinch. Combined, those projects represent a projected ROI of $17.3 billion over 5 years. If ethics remediation is not executed within 24 hours, funding suspension becomes permanent. At that point, you may pursue capital through private markets, assuming reputational risk does not deter investors. The operations lead raised his hand. Is there any leeway on the project freeze, at least until preliminary corrections are submitted? No, Camila said immediately. You may submit a remediation action plan, but no physical, legal, or contractual work may proceed until full recertification is granted. Period. She tapped another key. A new list appeared. And this is the first step. The following individuals are to be suspended, effective immediately, pending formal ethics review. This includes Director Hale. Hale stood halfway from his seat. This is outrageous. You can't just, I can, Camila said. Because your own compliance contract grants me enforcement authority in the absence of internal accountability. She looked around the room, eyes meeting each face with quiet force. For too long, companies have treated behavior as branding, not as law. That era is ending. With you, if necessary. Without you, if preferable. The projector dimmed. Camila finally took a seat. Now, I'm willing to review appeals and grant provisional leniency under Tier 2 governance, assuming clear evidence of good faith mitigation. But understand this. Every moment you waste posturing is a second you could be demonstrating reform. She turned to Elman. That begins with leadership. If you're serious, you'll start with culture. Replace your HR command, retrain your terminal staff, and re-educate every frontline executive who touched this file. Elman nodded. I will. Camila closed her laptop. Good. You have 24 hours. Richard Elman stood alone near the observation window of the VIP lounge, watching a private jet taxi along the runway, its shadow crawling across the tarmac like a metaphor for everything he was about to lose. His shoulders, once square with corporate pride, now sagged with a weight that numbers couldn't offset. It was 2:17 p.m. local time. Less than 3 hours had passed since Camila Frost entered the terminal, and yet the internal structure of Atlantic Eagle Holdings, carefully built over a decade, now creaked at the joints. 3 projects frozen, a $12.4 billion loan suspended, and worst of all, a permanent mark on the company's global ethics profile, one that would follow every merger, every listing, every negotiation from this moment forward. The damage wasn't just financial, it was cultural, foundational, personal. Behind him, the quiet murmur of terminal operations had gone nearly silent. The lounge no longer buzzed with self-assured conversation or clinking glassware. The servers moved differently now, more carefully, more attentively. The coffee stain on the carpet near the bar, left by a rushed attendant after her incident with Camila, had not been cleaned. It remained as a stain in more than fabric. It was a reminder, and no one dared step too close to it. Camila re-entered the lounge with a quiet authority. Her blouse now changed, clean, unwrinkled, and sharper in color than the one before, a deep navy that seemed to amplify the weight of her steps. She walked directly toward Elman, not waiting to be greeted, not needing a formal invitation. He turned as she approached, and before she could speak, he lowered his head, not slightly, not diplomatically, but fully. A bow, an act that startled nearby staff and halted a server mid-pour. "I offer my apology," he said, voice low but clear, "on behalf of this company, its people, and myself." Camila paused, meeting his eyes as he looked up again, and she nodded once. "Don't bow," she said, her tone neither cold nor forgiving. "Just learn. Because if you do not, your name won't matter. Your legacy won't survive. This company won't exist." Around them, the atmosphere froze. No one moved. No one breathed too loudly. Elman nodded slowly, shame tightening his features like a vice. "The suspensions have been processed," he said. 15 employees. 6 removed from senior tracks. 5 demoted to supervised positions. 4 placed on indefinite leave, barred from international operations for 5 years. All names submitted to the Global Aviation Ethics Registry. Camila didn't smile. She simply tapped her tablet once to verify. The entries were real. The action was taken. She nodded. "That's a start," she replied. "But we both know suspension isn't transformation. You haven't corrected a culture. You've postponed its consequences." Elman looked away. She added, "These people weren't just a risk to your funding. They were a reflection of your blind spots. Your silence trained them." Across the lounge, Mason Colburn sat with his back straight, no longer barking orders into comms, no longer posturing with unearned authority. His ID badge had been replaced with a temporary visitor card clipped to the breast pocket of his now plain jacket. His access revoked. His voice removed from the chain of decision-making. 1 hour ago, he had been director of terminal operations. Now he was waiting for security clearance just to exit the executive wing. The irony wasn't lost on anyone who had witnessed his earlier performance. Camila made eye contact with him briefly. No malice, no gloating, only certainty. She then turned her attention to the lounge staff. Jessica, the woman who had turned her away from the breakfast enclave earlier, now stood stiffly behind the counter, her posture visibly altered by fear and realization. Camila spoke to her directly. "You were trained to protect an image," she said. "But the real work is protecting people. You have 5 days to submit for retraining under the ICA compliance program. If you complete it, I'll sign off on reinstatement for Tier 2 eligibility. If not, you're barred from passenger-facing service internationally." Jessica nodded, blinking fast, her voice catching as she whispered, "Yes, ma'am. Thank you." The young security officer, Dawes, approached nervously. "MS. Frost, I." She raised a hand gently. "You weren't malicious. You were complicit. And complicity isn't an excuse. It's a curriculum. You'll take the same retraining. Pass it, and you'll keep your clearance." Dawes exhaled in visible relief, then quickly nodded and stepped back. Camila walked over to the coffee station, the same one where the incident began. She poured herself a new cup, this time without interference, without hesitation. Everyone in the room watched her not because they had to, but because they knew this moment was no longer about position or class. It was about something deeper, something they had failed to see for too long. She turned back toward the center of the room, her voice rising just enough to be heard. "This morning, I was treated like an error in your system, an anomaly, an inconvenience to be redirected. And not because you lacked protocols, but because you ignored them when it suited you. What you all failed to understand is that oversight doesn't always arrive in a limousine. Sometimes it walks in quietly, watches everything, and holds the pen that writes your future. She sipped her coffee. Fortunately for you, I believe in education more than eradication. You're not being erased. You're being given a chance. Use it. With that, she turned, collected her things, and walked back toward the diplomatic gate, the path now cleared not by protocol, but by earned respect. No one stopped her. No one dared. And no one would forget. The jet cruised at 41,000 feet over the Atlantic, somewhere between dusk and dawn, somewhere between what had been and what was becoming. The cabin lights of the diplomatic class glowed soft gold, a deliberate blend of prestige and peace. Camila sat by the window in seat 1D, the seat that had almost been denied to her, her posture relaxed, but her mind steadily awake. The hum of the engines beneath her was low and distant, barely audible under the delicate silence of consequence. In her lap, she held a simple white envelope, no logo, no wax seal, no insignia, just her name, written in sharp penmanship across the front. She had opened it earlier, but the words still lingered in her memory, as if the ink hadn't dried. The letter had come from Arthur Hartley, not through email, not by a corporate courier, but by hand, delivered by a junior liaison who had spoken only 6 words. He asked that you read this. She had taken it with measured indifference, but now, thousands of miles above the fallout zone he helped create, she let herself revisit his words with something dangerously close to grace. MS. Frost, the letter began, I was wrong. I spoke from a place I didn't know existed within me. Or perhaps I did, and I just never had to confront it. Today, that changed. Today, I watched an empire bend under the weight of a voice we all tried to ignore. Yours. I won't ask for forgiveness, because I haven't earned it. I will only ask for instruction. If you believe there is still a place for people like me to learn, I will go there. There was no signature flourish. No attempt to dress up humility with self-preservation. It was stark, honest, and, oddly, the most human moment Camila had received all day. She now reached into the side compartment of her seat and pulled out a folder labeled ICAA Outreach. Inside were documents detailing her next phase, an initiative she had been building quietly over the last year, one that would use redirected ethics, funding to establish leadership rehabilitation programs in underserved communities. Not punishment, not optics, retraining, repurposing, rebuilding. She scribbled a short note on her stationery and inserted it into a reply envelope she had prepared in case Hartley ever wrote back. Her note was brief. You're right, you haven't earned forgiveness, but you've earned a place in the work. I'm assigning you to Kivu, Eastern DRC, under the F-14 Microfinance Reformation Program. You'll oversee equity deployment, teach sustainable leadership models, and report weekly to the Geneva office. It will be hard, it will be lonely, and it will save lives. After 12 months, if you complete the program, you may apply to join the Council of Recovery Advisors. There's a seat with your name on it, but only if your actions speak louder than your apology. She sealed the envelope, marked it with a black ink stamp, and handed it to the steward with instructions to deliver it to the Atlantic Eagle Diplomatic Response Team upon landing. No fanfare, no press release, just motion, real motion. Because true accountability wasn't a headline, it was a direction. Camila leaned back and allowed herself a breath she hadn't taken in hours. Her eyes closed briefly, and in the dark behind her lids, she didn't see the terminal or the faces twisted by arrogance. She saw Kivu. She saw women holding new bank cards, children learning to write their names, men in tattered blazers practicing how to greet a boardroom. She saw what healing looked like, not for her, but for the systems broken long before her first audit. The captain's voice came on overhead, calm and precise. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent into Zurich. Local time is 7:12 a.m. Skies are clear. We'd like to thank our diplomatic guests for flying with us today. The message was routine, but to Camila, every syllable sounded like resolution. She fastened her seatbelt, checked her tablet one last time, and reviewed a final log entry. It was a statement, not a file. Audit complete. Vong Lap Dong. Recovery authorized. She smiled softly to herself. When the wheels touched down on Swiss soil and the aircraft coasted toward its jet bridge, Camila didn't rush to stand. She waited, letting others gather their briefcases and scramble for connections, because she knew where she was going. She always did. As she stepped off the plane and onto the polished floors of Zurich International, a young man in a charcoal suit was waiting at the end of the bridge. "Ms. Frost," he said with a respectful nod. "The council is ready for your final summary." Camila walked beside him, her stride calm, her presence no longer something to be doubted. The world hadn't changed in one day. It never does. But something had shifted. Something irrevocable. Because now every person who had laughed, who had doubted, who had excluded, would remember her not as a passenger, not even as an auditor, but as the architect of a different kind of power. One that didn't just correct injustice. One that knew how to teach it to heal. Before you go, let us know, where in the world are you watching from? Which moment in the story hit you the hardest? And what would you have done if you were in Camila's position? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every one. If this kind of story moved you, consider subscribing for more powerful narratives that challenge, reveal, and inspire. Your support helps bring stories like this to light.